Hi, nurses. Welcome to Shift Change, the podcast for nurse leaders who are ready to shift their thinking from just a nurse to claim their position as a powerful agent for change. I'm your host, Amy Deagle, founder and CEO of the International Network of Nurse Leaders. We believe in the power of nurses to change the world, so let's get started. Hi, nurses. Welcome back to another episode of the Shift Change podcast. I know this is such a busy time of year for people, so if you're taking the time to listen to this right now in this busy holiday season, I really appreciate that. And as always, if you've enjoyed our podcast, we would so appreciate if you would take the time to rate, subscribe, or review to our podcast. That is honestly one of the best gifts we could get this holiday season, is you taking the time to just let us know how you have enjoyed the podcast. So today we have a special guest, Denetra Hampton. Denetra has built a production empire that includes a diversity and nursing science media initiative, a digital magazine, and an education center. Denetra's work is focused on the development of future nurse scientists through a lens of diversity and scientific storytelling. She is a 22-year Navy veteran and former United States Naval Nurse Corps officer. Her professional background consists of a Bachelor of Science in Nursing and a Master's in Health Services Administration. She has experiences in medical surgical, orthopedics, post-anesthesia, critical care, ambulatory surgical, clinical management, patient safety, quality improvement, emergency management, Medicare, Medicaid, the Joint Commission's regulations, and education. An innovator, Denetra has committed her work to the development of a forward-thinking, diverse, and business-minded nurse leader. Having studied diversity abroad, Denetra attended a mission trip to Chile and Argentina that allowed her to participate in group think tanks with diverse nursing and medical executives, as well as speak on panels to nursing students at universities there. A producer of film, Denetra just released her first mini documentary on the Black Angels, a nurse's story of African American nurses who risked their lives to care for patients with tuberculosis at Seaview Hospital. A community educator, speaker, and thought leader, Denetra was committed to bringing the profession of nursing to life. So I am thrilled to bring you this interview with Denetra Hampton. So thank you so much for being here on the Shift Change podcast. I am so excited to have you.
And I am excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, I was just telling the listeners, we connected via LinkedIn because I saw you were doing this amazing documentary, and we're going to get into that whole piece. But I'm wondering if you could tell us a bit more about your nursing career and your journey so far, because you've had an incredibly interesting nursing career.
It is. It has been interesting, Amy. Well, if you've read my bio, you know that my pedigree is military. So I did 22 years in the United States Navy, and I am a retired Navy Nurse Corps officer. So everything that I learned about nursing started from the Navy. And I have to say, it is one of my proudest badges of honor. So did that for 22 years. And I think that people who are listening to the podcast will probably say that's enough of a career for anyone. But 22 years did not end my career. I thought that when I was leaving the Navy, when I retired, that I was going to go into education, which is what I did. But I went into it from a grassroots approach. I did not go into it through the traditional academia in the classroom, so to speak. I started a business. And I started teaching nursing science on a chalkboard, so to speak. I created this little workspace, and you all know it out there on the web as the Nursing Education and Study Center. And it has been a fantastic workspace for students to come into to learn about health sciences, and in particular, my master is nursing science. And so I have been doing that simply because I saw a need for students who were going into nursing and not really grasping the fact that nursing was a science. Now, I say that because even today, we're going into 2020, people still don't think that nursing is a science, and we are. But also students come into nursing, and they come into it for so many reasons, but not truly understanding that they have entered into a science. And so I wanted to make sure that the role of the nurse scientist was something that they were aware of, because we have, I would say, every student that I have encountered, 100% of them just did not know that the nurse scientist existed. They thought that it was the nurse practitioner who was the highest thing that they could accomplish. And I literally was floored that no one knew that nurses did research. And so I became an advocate for that, not just for students, but in particularly African-American minority students, because we know that we have a lack thereof of that when it comes to that particular role. And so I wanted to make sure that not just the world became aware of that, but that African-American students understood that there was a place for them there. And it became very evident to me that that is one of the reasons why a lot of our stories have not been told, one of the reasons. So you all know me now for that work that has been done over 10 years from a grassroots approach. You know, you all are now seeing this Denetra Hampton, but I've been doing this work for 10 years, over 10 years, just, you know, in the community, and just with, you know, students and with all kinds of initiatives. But now we have come to a space where that diversity and that nursing science has now transitioned into a media platform. So we went from teaching nursing science from a diverse approach on a chalkboard to now doing it on film. So that's how Denetra Hampton got to where she is now, talking to you.
Amazing. So I want to just dig in a little bit more about your time spent as a naval nurse, because that's not a common career, especially up here in Canada. So can you tell us a bit about what that consisted of? You had 22 years as a career in that, and I'm just fascinated to know more about that piece.
You know, the entire 22 years was not as a naval nurse, I have to say that. The Navy is so complex that, you know, when I first entered the Navy, I did not enter as a nurse. I ended up applying for what they call an officer's program, and it was a medical enlisted commissioning program is what the Navy calls it. After 10 years of serving enlisted, I applied to become a nurse through this program, and I was picked up, and they sent me to the school of my choice, and I went to Hampton University, which is where I graduated nursing school, and then I became an officer after that. So that is how I became an officer. So of the 22, 12 of them I served as an officer. I continued after that 10 years enlisted as a naval officer. So a total of 22 years was what I did when I retired. So the journey was very interesting. It didn't, you know, a journey is never, you know, one lane. So, you know, I started out enlisted, ended up as an officer, but I served in so many different capacities as a naval officer that really for me are key to the decisions that I make. They're key to all of the relationships that I have, and they are key to the business decisions that I make, all because of, I believe, a lot of the experiences that I had as a naval officer. I served in the Fifth Fleet, which is, you know, over in Bahrain, you know, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, those types of things. And all of that has impacted me as a person. And so, yeah, I mean, I've had a lot of experiences as a Navy sailor and then as a Navy officer. But, you know, you're talking about 22 years. That's a long time.
So, Denetra, can you tell us a bit more then about nurse scientist as a career? What that looks like, how somebody that's interested in that career trajectory would get there, what your work looks like, I think it's an area, like you said, that not a lot of people are aware of.
Well, I'm not a nurse scientist. I am an advocate for a nurse scientist. Now, a nurse scientist is a person who has gotten a PhD in nursing. I do not have a PhD. However, I do know the challenges, not by experiences, but I do know that there are a lot of challenges to just being aware of what that process is, especially when we start talking about access and we start talking about access for minorities. I am a big advocate for that role in particular, Amy, because we do not have enough minorities in that role when it comes to research. And when we start talking about health disparities and social determinants of health, we run into those problems because of a lack of diversity. And that role in particular, in my opinion, is the most important role in the profession of nursing. Now, the nurse scientist has a PhD in research in some type of area. And so that a person who is trying to become a nurse scientist, of course, has to acquire that. But I think oftentimes that role has been so kind of closed off that a lot of people are not aware of how to achieve it. And so I'm hoping to bring all of that to the forefront so that more students know what it is and how to acquire it, and to get those people who actually have done that to become mentors and to become sponsors, because we know that mentorship and sponsorship are two different things. Being able to mentor someone doesn't mean that you are sponsoring them. When you sponsor someone, you give someone that access. And that's what we're lacking when it comes to the nurse scientist role. So the first thing is to become aware and to get educated on that. And so I'm hoping that this platform that I have is going to be able to do that. So that's what we're doing here. I, in particular, am not a nurse scientist, but it is my advocacy.
So I know that you started a film company, correct?
Correct.
And so when we spoke in the fall, you were heading out to Budapest, I believe it was, doing a debut screening for your film?
I was not doing a debut screening in Budapest. I was on vacation.
Vacation in Budapest. Okay.
However, after I came back from Budapest, I was doing my debut screening, and it was held at Johns Hopkins University.
Okay.
And yeah, so we went on vacation first, and then we came back and we went on tour. And we hit, the top 10 nursing schools in the nation. And I tell you, it has been fantastic. And if you've been following me, you know that we got to showcase the debut film, which is called The Black Angels, A Nurse's Story. And that film is about African-American nurses who risked their lives to care for patients with tuberculosis. And they took care of these patients at a time when there was no cure. And we're talking about back in the 1940s, and we're talking about a time where there was segregation. So you have all of these variables against these nurses who made a conscious decision to go in and care for patients when white nurses refused to do that. And so these nurses became known as Black Angels, and that name was coined by the patients themselves. It wasn't something that the doctors gave them or anyone else. The patients called them the Black Angels because all they saw were Black nurses. Mm-hmm. And this story took place out of Staten Island, New York, at Seaview Hospital. Seaview Hospital is no longer open. However, it was built in 1913, and it housed over 2,000 patients. It was the largest sanatorium in the country. New York City was by far the city that held the largest epidemic when it came to tuberculosis. It was killing millions of people, well, hundreds of thousands of people when it comes to tuberculosis. But at that particular time, it was this hospital, and this hospital was Seaview Hospital. And these nurses came from all states, from the Carolinas, from Michigan, from the South. and they came up to take on this epidemic. And the story is remarkable because I got to interview Black Angel Marjorie Tucker Reed. And at the time that I interviewed her, she was 94 years old. And she got to give me an account of her story as a Black angel and working at that facility during that time, and what it meant for not just African American nurses, but what it meant for nursing at that particular time. And this story, this documentary, not only talks about their journey, but it talks about the contribution of African American nursing, to medicine, to research, and to science. This is why the role of the nurse scientist is so vital to the future of nursing. And it's so vital to being raising awareness of how African Americans have contributed to this profession in that particular way. Because not only was Seaview Hospital known for its large and vastness for taking care of patients with tuberculosis, but it was known for the cure for tuberculosis. The cure for tuberculosis was found at Seaview Hospital by Dr. Robert Robichek, with the help of the Black Angels. And that's what makes this story so amazing, is that you had these nurses who made the decision to go into a space where most of us even today probably cannot comprehend to do, and to take care of patients that even if it costs them their own lives. And to me, that is fascinating. And not only is it fascinating, but it's worth bowing down to. And so I call it a gift from God to be able to have someone like Marjorie Tucker Reed sat in a room with me and tell me about that experience. And then now I get to share that with the world. And so now we went around to top leading institutions. And the feedback that I got about this story has been absolutely amazing. And every school that I attended wanted this film in their school, in their curriculum. It's just that fantastic. And I hope that more people are going to be able to see it as we move on and start to disseminate it in different ways. But it is definitely one for the books. And it's not just one for the culture, but it's one for the profession, to grow from, to learn from, and to be able to make changes for our future. So it's a great, fantastic story, and I hope that you'll be able to see it as well.
Yeah, so I was going to like, it sounds like such an incredible story, and you've done an amazing job putting this together. So is there plans to have, just the average nurse be able to view this, or what is your kind of production and promotion goals with the documentary?
Well, after we've just completed the tour, so now we're working on licensing it out to academic institutions, museums, and libraries. That's my goal for the film.
Well, you'll have to keep us posted because we'll share that when it's out for public viewing. So I know that you're working on now another documentary. Is that right? Year of the Nurse 2020?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you want to tell us a little about what
2020? We couldn't let that come and not do a documentary.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about what that looks like.
Oh, wow. This is another, it's like, the universe just came and swept me up and said, hey, look, I need you to tell these stories. It's like, here we are, the World Health Organization has designated 2020 as the Year of the Nurse. How fantastic is that? You're talking about a profession that's been around 100 years. And is known for so many things. And then now we have this year that's designated as our own. And so I particularly wanted to tell a story in my own way that gave homage to Florence Nightingale. The year is designated in her honor. It is her 200th birthday. So it is in her honor, and also of the midwife. So we are going to go along. The documentary is going to go along with the celebration of those three things. And so you're going to see this story go from novice to expert, which is what Florence Nightingale was an advocate for. And we are going to not only go through what she was an advocate for, but talk about that in a way that is diverse, because that's who we are and that's who we are becoming. My signature piece for my entire company is nursing science and diversity. So at the end of all of my films, you're going to learn something about nursing science and diversity. You just are. That's just what this whole company is about. And so we're definitely going to talk about and celebrate Florence Nightingale, but we are going to talk about where nursing is today and where we're going in the future. And we have a fantastic cast already. Florence Nightingale has already been casted. Her name is Jordan Johnson, and she is going to be Miss Florence Nightingale in this film. And it is going to be fantastic. And we start production January, and we're ready to go.
That sounds so exciting. So is it going to be available for public viewing, or how will nurses be able to see it?
Well, the first thing is we're going to have a premiere after it's done. And then, of course, we'll go and go around to schools as well, and the same way we did the first one. And then we'll put it out to people who want to have it to view as well.
Amazing. Well, again, let us know when that's out, and we'll help share that, because I'm sure people are very interested to see that. We're just going to take a quick pause here because I wanted to mention that the International Network of Nurse Leaders membership community is now open. We are accepting members from around the world, nurses who are looking to get inspiration, encouragement, and really get momentum with getting their ideas out into the world, or nurses that love to be champions of these ideas and just want to be connected around their nursing peers who are working to change the world. So if you're interested in having that kind of community, head on over to nurseleaders.ca/membership. So I know that you did some mission trip. Was it to Chile and
Yes.
Argentina? So can you tell us a bit about that? Because you mentioned on your website that you had the ability to participate in think tanks with diverse nursing and medical executives. And I just want to know a little bit about that experience.
That was probably my very first experience. As we move throughout our journey, Amy, if we're lucky, we get these, I call them little whispers in our lives, where the universe kind of gives you an experience and then another little experience that kind of builds you up for who you are becoming. And if you do well in those experiences, you get to move on to the next step. That's how I see life. Mm-hmm. And I see it in a way that if you pay attention to everything that comes your way, you can kind of just fall into your destiny. So this happened for me maybe 2-3 years ago. And I was just really, honing my craft and mastering myself as an educator in nursing science and an influencer in diversity. And someone noticed that, who was getting this team together. And they needed a nurse who was going to be able to go over and speak to a culture, Chile and Argentina, a diverse culture about nursing. They were trying to change the narrative about the people that they were putting into these mission trips that really was not, adding to what needed to be done, because we know that things are changing. Mm-hmm. So I got a phone call, and they gave me the ins and outs of this trip to Chile and Argentina. And this was an educational trip. It wasn't what everyone thinks about as when you think about mission trip. You're thinking about going in and getting your hands in with the community, which is what initially I thought it was going to be. But this was a leadership education mission trip. And I thought that was fantastic. And so what we did was it was different leaders from different cities. And different disciplines. We had psychologists, doctors, I was the nurse. We had another nurse there as well, but we had all kinds of people on the team. And what we did was go around to different facilities and learn about how they did their care, their different healthcare systems, which is what I thought was amazing because, you know, the United States healthcare system is different than everybody else's. Mm-hmm. And so we got to learn about their healthcare system. We got to talk to those executives about how that worked. What was the typical day of a person who was admitted into their system and then getting discharged. All of that was fantastic for me to learn along my journey. But one of the most important things that I got to do in this trip was go to the University of Argentina and Chile and speak to nursing students. That was particularly what I was called in to do. They knew that they were going to go to the university and speak to the nursing students, and it was just fantastic. And so I got to talk to them about how we did nursing in the United States and what that meant and what the NCLEX exam was like. And so that was just up my alley. I mean, that's what I did day in and day out. So it was like drinking a glass of water, but being able to stand up in front of students who were able to see someone who looked like them. And I think that was the objective of the program, was to get people in that people could relate to and could, you know, have these kind of conversations with students who were, you know, possibly coming to the United States to be nurses. And so it was fantastic. It was really, really fantastic. But the think tank, when it came to the executives, was all about access to care and the different types of systems, which for me as a leader was fantastic. How often do you get to sit in another country and talk to them about their access system, their healthcare system, one-on-one? Rarely.
Never.
And so yes. So that was the most amazing thing for me. And we did that in Argentina and Chile. It was fantastic. So, yes. And so I say that to people about just having different experiences in your life and not being afraid to do other things to empower your career and, you know, just have these conversations and do different things with different cultures, because it truly empowers you individually and as a professional. So that entire mission trip prepared me for the next step in my journey. If you can kind of get that, what I did there took me to the next level. And you all are witnessing how all of those little steps came together.
That's incredible. What an amazing opportunity to have had. So I just want to pivot, Denetra, back to leadership specifically. And I know that you've created this incredible career for yourself. A lot of nurses, I feel like, get stuck in kind of the one career trajectory within nursing, and they aren't sure what else they can do within nursing. All they've seen, especially nurses out in rural areas, you know, it's the acute care or long-term care, and they don't realize how many other options they have with a nursing degree and within the nursing profession. So can you tell us a bit about how nurses can evolve their career, get involved in leadership? What other options are available to nurses out there?
Well, I think leadership, in my opinion, it just starts from an individual standpoint. I think oftentimes we wait for someone to tell us that we're leaders. Mm-hmm. And so that in itself stops us from taking on different avenues. This is what I tell my students, and this is what I tell, you know, anyone that I'm talking to when it comes to business, and we're talking about leadership and all kinds of things. You have to have something about yourself that wants to be a leader. I don't think that leadership is something that someone can just give you. Mm-hmm. You have to make that step toward leadership. And it can be done as early as possible, I think. I don't think that you have to have a certain position or a certain title to be a leader. You can start in your community. I personally believe that's one of the best ways to start to develop leadership skills, soft and hard. Mm-hmm. So this is what I tell people about that trajectory that you just mentioned, Amy, about the same old trodden road that nurses go down in their careers, and they're wanting to, move into different areas. Of course, you come into nursing and you want to be a nurse, so getting your skills at the bedside are vital. Mm-hmm. I mean, you cannot move forward without, acquiring certain skills there clinically, and then, of course, moving on past that into a way that you're able to touch lives. So I say that if you're going to move into leadership outside of the bedside and in different areas, you have to work in the community or in some type of way decide that that's going to be an area in some way, form, or fashion. Now, when you're doing community work, it doesn't have to be a one thing. It can be all kinds of things in the community. But you have to associate your career with people. If you stay in the trajectory of administration and all of those things, you aren't necessarily touching lives. Anytime you make an effort to go out and touch the life of other people, you automatically create a whole nother career. And that career is leadership. So service and leadership is vital to just creating a whole nother different path.
That's incredible. I want to just ask you, how do you deal with if you get any self-doubt or, you're not sure that this is the next step? So I've heard from a few people, like they feel that little twinge or, you were talking about that whisper. And all of a sudden, just as soon as kind of that whisper comes up, so does the self-doubt. And who do you think you are? And, you aren't the one to be doing this. So how would you suggest people deal with that self-doubt piece and the fear of taking that next step?
Ooh, I'm not the person to ask that question because I rarely have. I'm not a fearful person. And my personality is a very strong personality. You probably know that by now. I have a very strong personality, and it could just be from, my experiences in life. I think we all have a self-doubt in some form or fashion. But when it comes to my work, I'm very confident of who I am and what I'm supposed to do. And that's rare. Mm-hmm. That is very rare. And so I'm probably not the best person to ask that because I know that that's a common question. But when I do have self-doubt, I always go back to how far I've come. That's how I deal with it. I look back over things and I think about just, okay, you made it through that. What did you do? How did you change? What lesson did you get? And how did you get through it? And now that you're at another space, how are you going to repeat that? Just put that on repeat. Mm-hmm. So I always just think about how far I've come. And oftentimes we don't do reflection. As a leader, I always step back and just do reflection. We're always trying to be on the go, go, go all the time, thinking that, okay, this is not working. Am I doing the right thing? But if you don't take time to reflect, which is what I call going back and looking at how far I've come, you won't be able to move forward because you're always thinking that maybe someone else is doing something that you're not doing, or you're not, comparing yourself to mm-hmm. other people. Mm-hmm. But you have to be confident in who you are as a person and know that what you are doing is worthy because there's room enough for everyone. And your little piece of the pie is what you should be focused on. And that's easier said than done. And you have to be a very special person to be able to stay focused on that. And this is what I say about that in a kind of way. We always have this narrative as leaders. We say, who's your circle? I have a circle of friends that mm-hmm. support me or whatever. I am a person who doesn't travel in circles. I stay in my lane. And that lane it propels you forward. I think when people change the narrative of traveling in circles, they will move further. Now, that is one thing I can say that builds my confidence, is that I do not travel in circles. And when I say that to people, it's kind of hard for them to get, because so many people put in our minds in this business world that you need to have a circle that you associate with and your supportive circle. But once everyone in that circle gets the award, there's not anything else for you to get. Mm-hmm. So I say you have to get in the mode of traveling in lanes, because lanes propel you forward. And if you can get that, change your mindset, you're going to move not only faster, but you're going to move further.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yes, I've never heard anybody put it like that before. Oh, I was just going to say one thing. I was going to mention that you said, with that self-doubt piece, one of the biggest things you can do to overcome that is, like you said, look back, find those successes from your past history, but also just put yourself into action, right? You don't know until you try. And the best way to get over fear is to get into action and activity around that goal.
Oh, absolutely. That kind of all just kind of, falls in place. I think individuals, we know what our past is, and we know how we respond to things. But I am not a person who is traditional. So that question was really hard for me to answer, because I'm not a typical person. I don't travel. Again, like I said, I don't travel in circles. And fear, to me, oftentimes comes from circles. I think sometimes people think that it's because it's a comfort zone. And when you are in circles, you haven't met enough people to give you the confidence to overcome your fears. I think it's a misconception that if you are around people who support you and all of that, that you're going to go further, when it's really the opposite.
Fascinating.
So, yeah, I think that for me, I always talk to people that are smarter than me, that who are from different countries, all kinds of things that just don't totally go with how I was raised. Mm-hmm. And I get this idea about having friends and all of that, but it's a limit to that. And once you reach that limit, you can't go any further if you don't force yourself to get out of that circle.
Yeah. Interesting. So interesting. So I'm really fascinated to know what you're going to think of this next question then, because you have such a unique perspective on everything. So what do you think is the biggest challenge facing nurses today, and how might we go about solving that challenge?
We are our biggest challenge, Amy. And we are, because we put it off on other people, but nurses, change starts from the inside out. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter whether it's an organization or whether it's individual. Nurses, once we stop beating up ourselves, beating up each other, we could be one of the most amazing entities in the world. Mm-hmm. But we kill ourselves, and we kill ourselves first on an individual level. You have to remember, when we see nurses, when the world sees that word nurse, we think of someone at the bedside, but we forget that nurses are people and that they have their own individual issues. And if those issues aren't healed, they hemorrhage over to who they are as professionals. Mm-hmm. And so then and there is where we have issues, because we place those individuals in leadership positions. And then we have this entity called the nursing profession that suffers from that. So until we correct ourselves as individuals, until we as a nurse, a professional nurse, just as a person, looks at another professional nurse and can respect that person as an individual for who they are, and be able to give unconditionally, teach unconditionally, do everything unconditionally, knowing that nothing that we acquire is truly ours, and it belongs to the profession, we are our biggest enemy.
Sadly, I have to agree.
Yes. I mean, you cannot get around. I mean, if I could preach that to everyone, I would. I think that we try to take things as if it's ours. When you are service, it doesn't belong to you. Everything that you do belongs to the next patient. It belongs to the next student. It belongs to the next generation. Mm-hmm.
And until we grasp that, we are going to always be in the position that we are in today.
Well, and if we came together, I mean, like you said, we truly do have the power to change the world if we came together as a collective voice. And I mean, that's the mission statement of the International Network of Nurse Leaders. If we were to come together and work together, we would be unstoppable. But unfortunately, we are burned out and stressed out, in part because we've just done more with less, and we haven't come together to speak out against, poor working conditions and things like that. And I'm not saying that we deserve what we've created by any means, but, we need to be speaking up for each other and advocating for each other and our profession instead of just the patients. Yeah.
And, it takes one nurse at a time. That's what I say. This is something that has been a culture that we created over decades, and it's not going to go away just because it's Year of the Nurse 2020. Mm-hmm. We have to consistently and be deliberate and be intentional about, Denetra calling up Amy and said, hey, I really like what you did, and I want to sponsor you. We have to be deliberate in doing those things for each other. Mm-hmm. And, once we start to do that one nurse at a time, you'll start to see the change that nurses truly can make.
So as a leader in the nursing profession, what change do you hope to impact? What would you like your legacy to be, Denetra?
Without a doubt, the whole world is changing when it comes to demographics. And I mean inside and outside of the profession. It's just changing in all kinds of ways. And I mean socially, economically, demographically, it's changed, and it is changing even more. I am truly invested in telling the story of minorities, telling those stories for decades that have not been told, and being able to make an impact in the profession from a learning perspective, because every nurse has a story. And I think that once we're able to learn from those stories, we're able to make the necessary changes individually and come to terms with who we are as a profession as a whole and move forward for the next generation and the next generation. And so for me, it's about telling that story, one story at a time, and, doing that from a diverse lens. That's who I am. And I hope that when they look back, they'll be able to say she made a difference.
And I mean, I think you're already out there doing that, especially with your production company and getting to a bigger audience. So can you tell us how the production company For Nurses by Nurses actually came to be?
It came to be just from this story. You know how, Amy, life is really, if you're destined to do something, my mother used to say, you can't stop a thing whose time has come. Mm. And she used to say that to me as a young girl when I would get, all perturbed about things and things didn't go my way. She would always say, listen, that's not, if it's meant for you, it's meant for you. But one thing for sure, nothing can stop a thing whose time has come. Because the universe is going to conspire to make sure that everything works out. And I think my life has just kind of come into that kind of space. And so I go with the flow. For Nurses by Nurses came about not because I deliberately and intentionally tried to do it. The universe brought that story to me, and the universe brought For Nurses by Nurses media company into play, and now we have a Year of 2020 film, and the universe has opened up that door, and we are just moving forward as it happens. I'm turning one page after the other. Mm-hmm. So it's not something that I personally set out to do, because as I said to you earlier, I was just teaching nursing science on a chalkboard. And then all of a sudden, the universe said, in this direction. Now, switch what you were doing from a chalkboard and let's put it on film, because we need to give you a bigger platform. This is what happens in life. Once you do one thing on a smaller platform, and you do well, and you do it with authenticity, and you do great by people, God gives you the next platform. Mm-hmm. Mine went from the chalkboard to now a world stage. How about that?
It's so inspiring, and it reminds me of this quote. It's actually wallpaper on my cell phone right now, and it says, grow where you're planted.
Yes, absolutely. And I couldn't have said that any better. I may have said it in a more spiritual way, but that's exactly what it is. And the thing is, you have to do it from authenticity. You know, so often we don't take what we have at the moment and trust that the universe is giving us exactly what we need at that particular time. Mm-hmm. You have to take what it has given to you at that particular time, do your best. And then when you've done your best, everything else that you need for the next level is going to come. And then you're going to be able to showcase everything that you've learned at that lower level at the next level. That's what Denetra Hampton did. No one knew about the past 10 years that I've been working. They just know about this time now that God has said, okay, I'm going to show people who you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it really is about making the best of where you are right now, learning and growing those skills. And that really comes down to our message of any nurse can be a leader.
That's it.
And
you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and if you start taking those actions and start showing up as that leader wherever you work and, you know, in your communities, in your families, that's going to only grow from there. So you may not have the official title tomorrow. You might not have the job that you think you want tomorrow, but you have to start with where you're at with what you have and trust in that growing process, because even if you got what you wanted tomorrow, you probably wouldn't do a great job at it, because you have to grow and evolve into that next step, right?
This is right. And, you know, don't get tired. You know, sometimes we get tired if we're in that position so long. You know, we think, when am I going to get to the next level? You have to become someone for the next level. Mm-hmm. You know, you can't manipulate yourself into the next level. You just cannot manipulate your way to a bigger and brighter thing. You have to become the person to handle that. And anyone who is successful will tell you that they had to become someone. And so in whatever way and however long it takes for you to do that is the reason why you're in that same position for that long. Mm-hmm. That's just my belief.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Sounds good.
Well, I just want to touch base again on the vision statement of the International Network of Nurse Leaders, which is, we believe in the power of nurses to change the world. So,
and I'm going to tweet that because I love that.
Awesome. So what do you think of that statement? And in your opinion, what are some, you know, issues, social justice issues, just anything that nurses can put their collective voice behind to start making a difference?
Oh, I mean, I think what you're doing is amazing. I think anytime, I just think the whole idea of podcast is, you know, you get to, you know, lend your voice to the world. I mean, you're able to now reach out to people like myself and other leaders and get their opinions about nursing, and you're able to spread that to all kinds of people. Mm-hmm. That's impact, if you think about it, because you are influencing other people and how they make their decisions. Because people who listen to your podcast now have access to all other kinds of opinions. So your mission statement is fitting, and it is fitting about. It tells me about who you are and what you're trying to do with your own purpose, which is absolutely amazing. There are so many issues, Amy, that nurses can affect. And I mean, because we are the front lines of healthcare, that's one thing. Mm-hmm. But you also have to remember that we are the front lines when that patient just goes home. So, you know, the buck doesn't stop once they leave the hospital. Everything continues when they leave that hospital and get to their home. Because if they can't continue that care, they're going to come right back to us, right?
Yeah.
So we are literally advocates for patients, for their families, and for the community. So all of that comes down to whether we are advocating socially, economically, or demographically. We can do that in all kinds of ways because we have access to that. So, you know, it just depends on who you are as an individual, what you're passionate about, on what particular advocacy that you choose. I chose diversity, or diversity chose me, and nursing science. And when you take on something that has chosen you, you become a part of that. And once you become a part of something, that becomes a part of your DNA. And we know that's like HeLa cells. You live forever. So I say let something choose you. And once it chooses you, you're going to make the most impact that you can.
I love that. So, Denetra, what are some things that you see happening today that make you proud to be a nurse and proud of where our profession is headed in the future?
Innovation, like what Amy is doing. I mean, I can't tell you. This is one of the best podcasts that I have encountered. It's from the way that you do it, to the way that you have followed through, to the way that you have stated your mission statement, and the way that you have lived up to that mission statement in the time that I've known you.
Thank you.
I think that the more people that you do this with, the more people are going to get who Amy is and what she's capable of doing. I have watched you since I've met you, and you are fantastic.
Oh,
and I think that your platform is doing something that I'm not quite sure you are aware of yet. And so I hope that you're able to take this to another innovational level, because I see it happening. I consider myself a visionary. So I can see that the shift change is really going to be a shift change in 2020. I truly, this right here is what podcasts are just great things in itself. But to have a great nursing podcast is a different thing, where you are doing something that's impacting the entire globe. That's where you want to be. And I think that you're headed there. Because if you keep this in a diverse lane, as you are doing, I see you doing that, because you definitely have the eyesight for that, because that's in your mission statement. You're going to impact the world. So I'm hoping that Amy is going to do that. This is what I like, what Amy is doing.
Well, thank you. And I didn't pay her to say that. And if anybody's listening, I'm honored to have been connected with you. And I mean, honestly, the best piece about launching this podcast has been the incredible nurses that I've been able to connect with. And
and you're good at it.
It's amazing how professionally generous nurses are in giving their time for these interviews and sharing their wisdom. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us, because I know you're very busy, and I honestly appreciate and respect what you're doing for the nursing profession. So thank you for being here today.
Yeah, this is going to be good stuff. The International Network for Nurse Leaders. I love it. And I'm going to make sure I tweet this, because this is good stuff, particularly how you do it. I mean, a lot of people have podcasts, but if you're not doing it correctly, it's just business as usual. You're doing a great job.
Well, thank you. So we're going to make sure that all of our listeners know how to connect with you, Denetra, as well. It'll be listed in the show notes. It'll be available on our website. Before we close today, do you want to just tell them how they can link up with you, whether that's on Twitter or LinkedIn, and your website?
My website is www.fornursesbynurses.org, and I am on Twitter at NurseD3. I am on LinkedIn at Denetra Hampton, and Facebook, NurseD3 as well. So I'm on, and Instagram, NurseD3.
Perfect. So we'll make sure that we have all those handles linked on the show notes, and as well on the blog page on the website. So if you are interested in following along with Denetra's journey and her amazing documentaries that she's putting out there, that we connect you guys together. And so just as we're closing here, Denetra, I'm wondering if you can provide listeners with 3 tangible takeaways or pieces of advice.
Really quickly, yeah. Let me see. As I said, I'm a storyteller. Every nurse has a story. First thing is, if you have not made enough impact on a person's life where their story cannot be told without mentioning your name, you're still doing business as usual. Make sure that you impact the person in a way that if they take your name out of their story, it can't be told. that's what you want to be. That's where you want to be. Number 2 is, we talked about this, stay in your lane. Try to get out of the narrative of circle binding. I mean, there's a particular space to that, a certain area that you can have a circle, but at some point you've got to remove yourself from that circle and get into a lane so that you can be propelled into a bigger and greater purpose. And last but not least, I'm thinking about a quote from William Blake. The beginning of it's really long, but the last part of that quote, Amy, says, "As a man is, so he is, so he sees. As a man is, so he sees." Mm-hmm. And what I want to challenge people to do today from this podcast is to think outside of your box. Begin to open up yourself to other nurses that don't look like you and don't think like you and have not traveled the same road that you have. Talent is one thing, but genius is another. You have to get into a space where you are empowering who you are as an individual and as a professional, simply because you are able to have a conversation with everyone in this world.
Ooh, powerful. Thank you. Okay, so to wrap up, I'm really excited about this because you are a storyteller. So, Denetra, can you tell us a story from your nursing career that had an impact on you to close out this episode of the Shift Change podcast?
Well, this particular story is one that I tell all the time because people always ask me that question. It's a Navy story. When I first left, I was assigned my first overseas tour as a Navy lieutenant, and it was in Bahrain, and I got assigned to the clinic there. Well, there was one night on duty where there's this, we're talking about in the Fifth Fleet, Atlantic Ocean, and there's this huge ship, if you can imagine that. And this guy, young sailor, had appendicitis on the ship, and we had to go out to that ship to get that patient off of that ship and bring him back to land. And here I am getting on this little tugboat as a new nurse with all of these guys and a doctor. And we're floating out on the Atlantic Ocean to go out to this huge monster of a ship to get this sailor. And if you can imagine the ship, just bringing this guy down on a cart down to this little tugboat. And then us, as a team, tugging him back over the Atlantic Ocean to get him to the hospital. That was one of the most amazing experiences of my life as a nurse.
Wow. Yeah, I can't even imagine it.
I mean, it was just, when they called me, I was the nurse on duty. They said, "Hey, we got to go out to the ship, and they are in the middle of the ocean." And I'm saying, how are we going to get there? They said, "You got to meet us at the pier." This is something I had never did before in my career. And I met the team at the pier. We got on this little tugboat, Amy, and just imagine a little boat floating across the Atlantic Ocean to this huge, huge Navy ship. And they lower this guy down on one of those little carts on ropes to get to us on this little tugboat on the side of a ship. I mean, it was the most amazing experience that I've ever did as a Navy nurse. That was it. And that's when I became a real nurse right there.
That's incredible.
Isn't that amazing?
It is. I could not fathom it, and I would probably be seasick. So.
But I love to tell that story. Yeah, that was one of the best experiences. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for being here. I appreciate you taking the time, and thank you for sharing all your wisdom and advice with us. I truly appreciate you being here today.
And, I appreciate you asking me. And again, let me know if I can do anything for you. And we have to stay in touch because we got work to do.
Absolutely. Big things for 2020 are coming.
Yeah, I can't wait to tell your story. Okay?
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you for being here, and thank you everybody for listening. Like I mentioned, we'll make sure that Denetra's stuff is all linked in the show notes and on the website so that you can connect with her. I know you're going to want to follow along on her journey, and just thank you all for being here. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you loved the advice shared on this episode, we would be so grateful if you would let us know. Please head over to Apple Podcasts, formerly known as iTunes, and subscribe to our show, and then rate us and leave your review. We would be so grateful if you would take the time to subscribe, rate, and review. While you're on our website, nurseleaders.ca/connect, all of our social media handles are there, and we would love to get to know you on social media as well. Thank you again for listening today, and remember, nurses, we have the power to change the world. Let's start today.